I'm Mike Costello, and I'm with the Reverend Iris Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about some ideas and thoughts about dealing with loneliness. All of us deal with loneliness. It's a part of the human condition. Sociologists and psychologists tell us that one of the greatest difficulties that we have as a people is dealing with loneliness, dealing with feelings of isolation, and dealing with the crises that take place within our individual minds and hearts in our daily lives. And so we'd like to begin by talking about why it is that people are lonely. Iris?
Well, I think one reason people are lonely is because we have the inherent wish and desire to find our way back to God. And it is lonely here on Earth because it's not our homeland. We came from other stars, other planets, other places. And so we do have this loneliness inherent in our hearts. And another factor of loneliness is not reaching out to others and just being self-centered. Then we don't have the feedback of human energy back and forth.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about loneliness, I think it's important as we begin to talk about the difference between loneliness and being alone.
Yes.
Because many of us do very well at being alone, and many of us can spend great amounts of time and sometimes all of our lives principally alone. But the feeling of loneliness is really something that happens within individuals, and it becomes an emotion and a feeling. And that loneliness is something that almost all of us have to deal with from time to time, just as most of us have to deal with depression. And we begin the process of looking at why it is we have these feelings and what it is that prompts them and creates them. One of the things that you said was that's very, very true, is that we isolate ourselves from other people or from the experience of life. But so often, right in the midst of life itself, we're lonely. And one
Yeah.
example that I can think of is that many times people will come for counseling, or we'll have an opportunity to talk with people as they share with us their feelings and their life challenges. And they'll say, I'm so lonely. I have such a lonely feeling. And yet, as we talk to these people, they have that feeling of loneliness even when they're at work, surrounded by people they like, or at home when they're surrounded by people that they love, or walking down the street, going to the store. When we come into contact with daily life, we come in contact with so many people, and yet we don't connect with them. Isn't
Yeah.
that?
That's it. One, we don't connect with others, and two, we don't care about others deeply enough. And I say we collectively because I think whatever is the problem for one person is a problem more or less for others. So if we really care about other people, we're going to intermix with them. We're going to be helping them whenever we can, and we're going to be looking out for them and looking to them and praying for them and having them in our thoughts and in our hearts. And just a thought makes all the difference in the world. When we send prayers to others and pray for others, it creates an energy of light that goes out to that person, and so it lifts. And so if we just pray for each other, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. If we make that connectiveness between ourselves and other people, and if we build within ourselves the reality that we're surrounded by people who are just like us.
Yeah.
And so often we believe that people are different than we are, that they're maybe better, maybe worse, maybe more educated, more or less educated. One of the problems that we have in church, in fellowship, and in the ministry, as you've experienced in your ministry and I have, is that people create in their minds the ideas that some people have a different value to life than others have. And some people look at ministers and hold them in very high esteem. Some today look at ministers and hold them in very low esteem. But that doesn't really matter. What we're talking about is how it is that we perceive other people. And because of our life in the competitive West in this country, which is a wonderful and magnificent country, and we certainly don't belittle the country at all because it creates so many opportunities, but we create in our children, and we come up through the experience of early life and through adulthood with so many prejudices and so many preconceived ideas about our relationship to other people. In our church, we sing a song that is very popular in Unity, and it is I Behold the Christ in You. And what that song talks about is that we are called and invited to see Christ, to see the Spirit of Christ, the presence of God, if you will, in everybody. And then we are invited to see it in ourselves. And we're invited to see it most of all in those whom we don't like, we don't understand, and we don't love. And so if we begin to see people and to connect with people, whether we like them or not, and then build upon the fact that we're all the same. And because we're all the same, all children of God, then we're all here in this life experience to learn the lessons that we have to learn, to do the things that we must do. And it creates a sense of community.
Yes.
And that sense of community can begin to dispel our loneliness because it breaks down the separation that we have. And so I think one of the causes of loneliness is that we view ourselves and others separate. And as soon as we do that, we set the stage for
Yeah.
loneliness.
Yes.
We've separated ourselves. They're not quite like we are. And we've seen that, of course, in races. We've seen it
Yeah.
in nationalities, but we also see it in neighborhoods and in attitudes. And everything that divides us and that calls to mind our differences creates the seeds for loneliness. Everything that is inclusive and that pulls us together as a human race and as a human people, that is a positive affirmation of life that begins to dispel loneliness.
That's right, and that which is exclusive then separates us, is separating. And if we can just remember that God is one and we're all one under God, then we don't have that feeling of division and exclusiveness because we feel inclusive with all of humanity and the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom and so forth. And we know that we are all, if we know in our hearts that we're all one, we have a wholly different view of others. And it doesn't mean we don't think normal thoughts about trying to help others or being impatient sometimes or rising above every situation. That wouldn't necessarily be true unless we're very advanced souls indeed. But it's just accepting others as being a part of God just as we are a part of God.
Mm-hmm. And then the next logical step to that process is giving up judgment.
Yes.
Because as we judge people, we then begin to separate ourselves again. We begin to say they're here and they deserve this or that and I'm here. And so that judgment aspect, and of course judgment is a problem with religious and spiritual people everywhere. And part of New Thought teaching is that judgment is a non-reality, that as the law is operating, then the judgments are rendered based upon our own life experience. They're not judgments that God is giving to us.
Exactly. It's a personal viewpoint. It's not an ultimate truth. And so if we remember that it's not an ultimate truth, it's our personal viewpoint, we can change that personal viewpoint or drop it and not even think about it. One good exercise for allowing ourselves to feel the oneness with others is just to look into the eyes of the other person with whomever we come in contact, like at the checkout stand in the grocery store or wherever we might be dealing with another person, just to look into their eyes instead of looking away or any other thing, just looking directly at them and let them and feel that and send that love. Acceptance, it's acceptance. If we accept that one as being who and what they are, no strings attached, no judgment, as you just said, but just looking at them with love and seeing their oneness with God. It makes all the difference, and it lifts the consciousness, the mass consciousness.
And that's tremendously important. When we talk about mass consciousness, we talk about the vibrations that are created through the mind action of people all over the world. And if we can create in people's minds positive, affirmative, loving, supportive thought processes, then the consciousness of the planet begins to rise.
Yes.
And in that process, we begin to change the world. And so often we want to change the world in all manner of ways and all wonderful ways, but we begin by changing ourselves.
Indeed.
And then as we change ourselves, we invite others to be changed like us, or perhaps not like us, but to be changed within themselves, and then to unify with other people, of all backgrounds and all traditions and all faiths. And then that collectiveness begins to break down this reality of separatist spirit and thought and of loneliness. But it's really important for us to understand that it begins by that connectiveness that you just talked about, and that is seeing people as human beings and recognizing the reality of their humanness. It's a little bit like when we get into a confrontation or an argument, and almost all of us have had the experience of arguing with someone, but as people argue, as couples argue, or as a mother and child argue, one of the things that the dominant personality will say is, "Look at me." And of course, what they're saying is, look at me and recognize who I am.
Yes.
I mean, how dare you not recognize who I am?
Yeah.
Open your eyes and see who I am. And so what we're saying is to look at people and to see them as human beings worthy of your respect and worthy of the reality that they are children of God, regardless of what they've done.
Yes.
Even the worst of the worst
Yes.
are deserving of that. And so to see people, and just as you said, in the grocery store, on the street, where we work, in our neighborhood, we don't even have to speak. We don't even have to share that. It is a mental process that looks at every person and makes a connection and respects that person.
Yes. And what we're really saying is we know we're all one.
Mhm.
And you know, before the fall, and there was a fall, the mankind fell 13,000 years ago, and at the last pole shift, and it changed the consciousness of humanity, and it changed the magnetic earth energy, it changed ever so many things, but above all, it took away our oneness, feeling of oneness. The ancient Mayans and the Druids were very advanced in their thinking, just as we are coming into again in this time of our evolutionary journey. And they respected everything as one. They respected Father, Son, Mother Earth, and everything on Earth, and all of the nature beings and the devas and the salamanders and so forth. In all the various kingdoms, they accepted all this as being, and they accepted each other as being one, and they gave each other an individual dignity, which mankind lost toward each other at the time of the fall. So now we're coming back into this, and it's with help from the ascended masters, it's help from those on the inner, but it's also our own doing, humanity as a whole, because we have grown into this once more. And so we're coming into that. And the raised consciousness that we're talking about is real, and it's helped, and it continues to help. And that's why we have such great change in the world today.
Yes, that transition of consciousness. And for those who aren't familiar with that term, consciousness has to do with the dynamic of mind and the vibration and energy that's created and emanated from mind and goes out into the universe and connects with people. One way that we talk about it so often is when you go into a room or into a house. It's very common for people to say, oh, it feels so good, it feels warm, it feels negative, it feels bad, it feels this or it feels that. And so they feel that vibration, which is created by the thought processes that have taken place, and those vibrations can be changed. And by changing that vibratory rate, we change the environment.
That's right.
And so the vibratory rate in terms of how we feel about people is able to address the issue of loneliness.
Yes, and it changes the energies around us so that we're not lonely. We are alone, as you said earlier, but not lonely. And again, it just comes down to caring for others and being thoughtful of others and accepting the individual right of every human being.
Of every human being, not only the ones that we like, and not only the ones that behave the way that we would like them to. One of the things that we talk about so often in our fellowship is Hattie Garlish, who was the foundress of our fellowship in 1927, used to talk about the importance of reading the newspaper as a prayer journal. And she used to say that the newspaper is the most uplifting printed matter in the world because we can read it and see people who are struggling, nations who are having difficulty, strife, all manner of things, and what a tremendous opportunity to sit in our kitchen and to send positive thoughts and to recreate and reconstruct that process through the dynamic of mind.
Yes, and that's just using a positive aspect to whatever comes into our life. And if the newspaper's delivered to us, then we have that means. If we turn on the TV, then we have that means. And most of us don't really like getting all of that negativity, but if we had the time and energy for it, then and we treated for it, we couldn't find a better way to live by treating.
Absolutely. And it goes back to our perception and the consciousness that we have and the consciousness that we use to embrace life and other people. And so often we go through life and we don't embrace other people. And we just, as you said in the grocery store, we go about our business with our cart and get our food and do what we need to do and go to the check stand and leave, and we have never, ever recognized another human being as a human being, let alone had a positive thought. And if we had a thought, it was probably, oh, she shouldn't have pushed her cart in front of me, or why can't I find this or that, which really speaks to how our minds operate.
Yeah.
And for so many people, life is spent in the negative lane of life, if you
Yes.
will. And everything is negative, and everything is challenging, and everything is difficult, and everything separates them. And everything brings them to a more and more lonely point in life.
Yes. And again, the lonely aspect is being self-centered. It's the little self that we're centered on instead of the higher self and centered on the divine.
Mhm. Some practical aspects. We have a lady in our church whom you know, and I won't identify her because we haven't asked her permission, but she's 90 years old. And few people live to be 90 years old, but she is a radiant and happy 90-year-old. And she told me some time ago, she said, you know, all of my friends are dead. But she said, it doesn't matter because I have all new friends. And so she went on to tell me, she said, when I turned about, and I don't remember what age it was, but I think it was, she said, when she was about 65 or 70, she said, I started going to funerals all the time because my friends were all sick and dying. And she said, I thought, well, I'll be next. And so she said, then I got to be 75 and I got to be 80 and I got to be 85. And all I did was bury my friends. And she said, I started to get depressed about it. And then she said, I decided that if I'm not going to die now, and if all of my friends are dying, I'd better make some new friends. And so she said she went out and she joined a church such as ours, and she joined other groups. And she said, now I have a wonderful group of new friends. And she was sharing with me the fact that she has so many warm memories of her lifelong friends, but her new friends have now taken the place. And what a thought process that is. What a difference that is between somebody who would be 90 years old and be wringing their hands and saying, my friends are dead and I'm alone, and isn't it awful? And that's not really to make fun of that person. It's more to identify the fact that the way people think and the dynamic of their mind determines whether or not they're lonely, and whether or not they're happy, and whether or not they're fulfilled, and what it is they have to deal with. This little lady is just like any other 90-year-old, if there is a typical 90-year-old. There are some Sundays that she can't drag herself to church because she's weak and she's tired. Other Sundays she's radiant and happy. But in the midst of it, she always sees the positive aspects of life.
Exactly, and she still takes time to travel a great deal too.
She travels, she does what she needs to do, and as her friends and doctors tell her, don't take that trip, you might hurt yourself or die. Well, at 90, and so she has a very positive attitude, and her way of embracing these new friends. And now she has a new housekeeper, and her new housekeeper is a lady that she's had some challenges with, and she even views that in a very positive way. So it's the difference, and that's what makes the difference between a lonely person and a person who is alone, but is very much at peace and happy in their aloneness.
It's how we view life on an individual basis and how we view our surroundings, our environment, and particularly the people in that environment. And it's all, again, we're all one. And if we honor the creatures, the plants, the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, then that's all part of it.
Oh, absolutely. And you talked so well a few minutes ago about the ancient Mayans and some of the civilizations that have gone on. And so often we lose their wisdom. But in ancient times, and even in our own country, if we look at the Native Americans and what those wonderful people in their spiritual life did to connect the physical life or the world with nature, and to create that unity between physical life, nature, God, their individuality, and to bring it all together in such an essence of mutual respect, of tolerance, of understanding, of reverence. That's far more than any reverence that we have in our church with the organ playing.
Yes.
I mean, that's so hollow, and yet we believe that that's spiritual, and we believe that that has such great religious impact, where in truth, if we look at Mayans, or if we look at Native Americans, or we look at meditative or contemplative Christians, people who are involved in monastic life, many, many faith traditions are able to make that connectiveness and to accept the connectiveness. Then a wonderful thing begins to happen in terms of eradicating the loneliness.
Yes. And we need to remember, too, that all of life is balance. And if we are lonely, then we can balance it out. If we've been lonely, we can balance it out with the opposite. And if we do it consciously, it's whatever we decide to do that we're going to do. If we decide we're going to be lonely, then we will be lonely.
Absolutely true. We decide.
Yeah.
And whether we decide consciously or subconsciously, it is our choice. And it doesn't have a thing to do with God.
Yes.
God is much too involved with the laws of the universe to worry about the minute details of our life. And it's a little bit like the movie Oh God a few years ago. And I thought a wonderful line in that was, one of the early movies, I forget, but when the store clerk was saying, I've done what you've asked, all of these people, my life is destroyed, and he's asking God to do something to restore his life and to make people believe him, and God says, well, I have no control over that. Well, it really speaks to the fact that God's control doesn't change, and God's view of life and the world doesn't change. God's view of Iris and Mike and everyone else doesn't change, and it's up to us to direct the realities of our life. And God's kind of finished with us,
Yeah.
and He's left it up to us.
By giving us free will, that is essentially true. And so we exercise that free will however we choose. And if we choose to be morbid, if we choose to be lonely, if we choose to be uplifted, if we choose to be helpful, then it's whatever we choose. But if we are lonely, then we can, and we're all lonely at various times, we can remember that being, as you said earlier, being alone is not necessarily being lonely, and asking ourselves, what do we really want in life? And if we want more people around us, then reach out. Mm-hmm. If we want time to be contemplative, to pray and to meditate, then use that time. Don't just squander the time by being lonely, but use the time. And we all have the same amount of time. And so we can use it the way we choose. And we don't have to do the same thing forever. We can reach out to people for a time, and then we can be quiet for a time.
Let's talk about some practical aspects for those who are facing loneliness. And again, we're not talking about anybody changing their religion or believing what we believe, but just some principles that anyone of any faith tradition can use to deal with loneliness. And I guess as we begin this, because we are a religious organization, and because New Thought is such a dynamic part of creating a process of mind and mind action, we'd start with prayer. Yeah. So how could someone that is lonely, I mean, just deep in loneliness and is troubled by that, how would they begin their prayer?
Well, I think they could pray to help me, God, to change that which I need to, so that I'll be lovable to others. Help me to see where I can help others in the world. And so we're asking for help from the divine for how we can reach out to others and how we can change ourselves. Because if we're lonely, then we need to change. And we need to know what it is we need to change. And I think, first of all, we would evaluate our own faith. And what does our faith comprise? How do we use it? And how does it serve us? And so if we define our faith and don't like what we're seeing, then regroup and find a different way of expressing faith.
Mm-hmm. Or a different way of interpreting and understanding our own faith.
Yes.
One of the things I recently spoke at an interfaith gathering, which happened to be at a Catholic high school. And one of the things that I was sharing with the young people there, most of whom were Catholic, and we were talking about a variety of things. And one of the things that I said to them was, be a good Catholic, but allow it to speak to the needs of your heart, because the answers to your needs are there. If you're a Methodist or a Muslim or a Catholic or a Confucian, whatever it is that your faith is, the answer is there. And it isn't that you have to change. It is that you need to reinterpret your faith and your faith tradition so that it speaks to your need.
Exactly. So we define what our personal, intimate faith is, and then we find an outside organization that helps sustain us in that faith and helps us fulfill the goals that we wish to fulfill. And those things would help us find God, Creator God, God the whole.
So fundamental to the prayer life of those who are seeking to deal with loneliness would be to claim the presence of God, to claim the need for help, and to be open and receptive to a new way of thinking, and also to be willing to look at people in a new and different way.
Yes, and accept everyone in their own right as being right for them at that moment. And we can't change other people in the first place. In the second place, we shouldn't want to. We should just try to inspire others and help uplift them. And so we have that obligation too. If we're able to do that, then we have the obligation to help others, because in the past, we've been helped equally.
And that's why we're doing this program, and that's why we have a church, and that's why we have classes, is to give people ideas and thoughts about how they can deal with the challenges that they have in life. And certainly loneliness is a tremendously debilitating challenge that many people are faced with. And of course, loneliness is just a step away from, or is really hand in hand with depression in many cases.
Yes, it is. And so again, we're depressed because we're not self-sufficient, and we're not reaching out to others. And we just need we need to define our faith, to find out what it is, who in fact are we, where are we coming from in this life, what are our spiritual goals, what is our spiritual undergirding, and then go a step farther and get the outside help after we know who and what we are and what we want.
Mm-hmm. And then in that process, I think we have to tell people that no matter how hard you pray or how much you meditate and how much you center yourself, you must act,
Right.
which means that you must change your life. And your life is changed because you change your way of thinking.
Exactly.
So you get up and do something. It's a little bit like prosperity teaching. So many people understand the teaching and they meditate and they visualize and then they sit and wait for the money to come.
Yes.
Well, in most cases, you have to go out and earn the money.
Yes,
So,
and when they prayed, they're not specific. I know one girl was really amused at a vignette I told about someone who prayed for a big check, and they received a huge check.
a big check.
And that was a big check. So we have to be specific in what we want. And if we're lonely, we have to be specific that we don't want to be lonely. And we have to ask for help in how can we not be lonely, and know that it's in reaching out to others, because it's a human element that we're lacking in our lives in one way or another. And then be realistic about it and know that we do seek our homeland. We do want to go to reconnect with the eternal God. And so that is part of the loneliness that is inherent with each of us. And if we just know that, then we're not lonely because we're fulfilled.
Absolutely. And in the last 30 minutes, we've been talking to you about ideas and thoughts on dealing with loneliness and with the aspects of that dynamic in your life and in all of our lives. And so we'd like to invite you to give some thought to the information that we've shared with you. We hope that you found it useful and helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within. Confident